What's up, guys, and welcome back to another episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. I'm your host, Mason Kenan, and in today's episode, we're going to be breaking down the Commanders' 53-man roster, along with going through a little bit of a season preview with the Washington Commanders 1 week away from playing their first regular season game where they travel down to Tampa Bay to face the Tampa Bay Buccaneers next Sunday, or this Sunday, really. But first, I do want to go over the Commanders 53-man roster, how it played out, how it all ended up playing out, as I couldn't get an episode out when it was first announced because I was moving into college, as you can see with the new background if you're watching the YouTube version. But we'll just jump right into how things played out, because it was kind of over the course of multiple days was how the Washington Commanders roster kind of got finalized, which has always been what was going to happen. Dan Quinn has said, Adam Peters has said that it's going to be the 53-man roster that was announced last Tuesday at 4 p.m. was not going to be the roster that they go into week one with, especially with the Washington Commanders being on the being second on the waiver wire for them. Now, of course, I'll get into how they didn't actually end up using that, at least so far, but there was definitely more options for the Washington Commanders in terms of adding players that maybe weren't on the roster originally for training camp and throughout the preseason. One of those guys that they ended up actually adding, who wasn't on the roster this preseason, was former Dallas Cowboys and Houston Texans wide receiver Noah Brown. Noah Brown has been one of the probably better wide receiver threes that you can have on a roster. He had a breakout year last year for the Houston Texans, eclipsing over 500 yards, I believe, along with some touchdowns as well. Now, he had an injury towards the back end of the season, kind of set him out for the rest of the year, and it kind of played a factor in terms of the preseason a little bit. Brown did not play in the preseason at all for Houston. He ended up getting released by the Texans a couple days ago, or on Tuesdays when their final roster cuts were happening, and the Washington Commanders ended up signing Noah Brown. Brown has been in the league for more than 4 years, so Brown isn't he doesn't have to go through the waiver wire or waivers. He can sign with anyone immediately. That's what Washington that's what Washington signed him with. They didn't have to claim him on the waiver wire just because of his veteran status in the league already. So Noah Brown signing a 1-year deal with the Commanders. Now it's a great move. It's especially with where this wide receiver room is at now. Trading away Jahan Dotson, it kind of leaves a gap. What are the Commanders going to do with their wide receiver 2, and who is going to catch passes beyond Terry McLaurin? Because right now you have Luke McCaffrey, I'll get into the full roster, but you've got like Luke McCaffrey, De'Ami Brown behind him, and Olamide Zaccheaus. Those 3 guys are going to carry the load for this passing game. That is expected to take a major leap this year compared to last year. Now, last year, of course, Eric Bieniemy, he loved to throw the ball. He threw the ball the most out of any team. The Commanders threw the ball out of the most out of any team in the entire NFL last year, but they didn't throw the ball efficiently. It was not great from Sam Howell. He threw it probably 45, potentially sometimes 50 times a game. And of course, Washington ended up going 4-13. So it did not really work out for the Commanders. Now this year, with Cliff Kingsbury as the new offensive coordinator, I would expect Washington to run the ball. Definitely be more two-dimensional than they were last season, when it felt like all we did was run the ball in the first quarter. We had some success, and then we just abandoned the run after we were down by a touchdown. So I expect more two-dimensional stuff out of this offense, and I think Noah Brown can definitely come in and fight for this wide receiver 2 position immediately. I think he's going to get significant playing time. I don't know especially how much playing time he's going to get week 1 against Tampa, as he's still learning this offense. He hasn't really been in the Cliff Kingsbury system before. Again, he was in Dallas when Dan Quinn was the defensive coordinator, but as a wide receiver, he wasn't really coached by Dan Quinn that much. Now, that was one of the bigger connections, which kind of Washington fans kind of pointed out, and one of the reasons why Noah Brown was going to be one of the top targets for the Washington Commanders once he was released by the Houston Texans. It's a good signing. Like I said, he'll come in. He can fight to be that wide receiver 2. Brown is, I believe, only 27, 28 years old. So he's definitely still younger than a lot of the other players in this wide receiver room. You look at Byron Pringle, who made the roster, Jamison Crowder. Both of those guys, I believe, are in their 30s. Byron Pringle is a little bit younger than that. But Terry McLaurin, next year, he's going to be entering his 30 years old season. Like that's not great. Again, Terry, when he was drafted, he was an older prospect already. And now next year, can't believe I'm going to say it, but he's going to be going into his year 30 season. So it's definitely a lot of question marks with this wide receiver room and the depth of this wide receiver room with some of these older veteran guys who haven't really, they kind of hit their ceilings and are on the back ends of their careers. Noah Brown comes in and kind of can bring a spark to this offense that they didn't really have in this wide receiver room that after they trade away Jahan Dotson. With Brown, I wouldn't expect much, like I said, of him in week 1. I just don't know how comfortable he'll be with the playbook in that time already, because he would be on the team for less than 2 weeks. So I don't know how much he's going to play there, but definitely down the stretch of the season. We've seen Noah Brown last year at Houston. He played some in the slot. He played outside. Again, he's a bigger receiver, which has been kind of one of the big storylines throughout training camp and throughout the preseason was Washington didn't have a big receiver in their entire receiving room. You had Terry McLaurin, who, yes, can catch contested passes, but he's only 6 foot tall. You had Jahan Dotson, who was only 6 foot tall. I believe he's actually 5'11", 5'10". Kaz Allen was a guy that was in that receiving room competing. Jamison Crowder, Byron Pringle. These guys are not tall players. Luke McCaffrey as well. They kind of needed a bigger body in the receiving room, and they got one with Noah Brown. I think it was a good pickup, something that needed to be done because you cannot be going into this season with Olamide Zaccheaus as your wide receiver 2, and then Luke McCaffrey and Dyami Brown, who has less than 150 career receiving yards, potentially being one of your big contributors. So it's a good move from Washington and Adam Peters in the front office. It was probably their biggest signing, I would say, in terms of bringing someone else in that was not in the building originally. And Brown now on this 53-man roster. I wonder what's going to happen. It looks like Dan Quinn and this team they're going to go into week 1 with 7 receivers on the roster. You've got Terry McLaurin, Noah Brown, Dyami Brown, Olamide Zaccheaus, Luke McCaffrey, Byron Pringle, and Jamison Crowder. That's 7 receivers. Crowder and Pringle are there for your returners, and then everyone else is probably going to get some playing time in the offense. So it was a good signing, but I'm kind of curious to see if they're going to run with 7 wide receivers throughout the entire season, or if it'll just be 7 wide receivers for now, and there's another move coming. So Noah Brown is a Washington Commander. Moving on now to probably the second biggest move that Washington made over this last week, and it was trading defensive tackle John Ridgeway to the New Orleans Saints. It was a late round pick swap. It was John Ridgeway and a 7th round pick, a conditional 7th, for a 6th round pick in 2025. Ridgeway has been a fan favorite over this last year and a half or so since being picked up on the waiver wire this time last year for Washington. Or I don't know if it was on the waiver wire or if they just signed him after he went through waivers. But he was brought in last year from our 5th round pick back in 2023 in Dan Quinn's defense. Now, for the second time under Dan Quinn, he won't be on the final roster, which is a little bit interesting because I thought Ridgeway has outperformed a guy like Fedarian Mathis, who was a 2022 2nd-round pick that Ron Rivera made a couple years back. I thought he outperformed him this preseason. Ridgeway had a great game against the New England Patriots in week 3 of the preseason. I loved what I saw out of him. So I was a little bit surprised when they did end up trading him. But still, Ridgeway, good luck in New Orleans. You know how Adam Peters, he's been trading not only Jahan Dotson, but he's been trying to accumulate more and more draft picks for the future. And that's what he does here. He kind of moves up from the 7th to the 6th round, potentially just gets a 6th round in general for their defensive, for like the 4th string defensive tackle. Now, like I said, Ridgeway would not be playing above Deron Payne or Jonathan Allen or not even Johnny Newton once Newton is able to get healthy and get back on the field. But Ridgeway would still get some significant playing time, I feel like, especially on obvious run downs where they're going to run the ball. He was a great run stopper. I believe he had a few games where he was in like the 80s in terms of PFF grades for run stops. So Ridgeway, He was a great player for Washington Commanders last year. He was definitely one of the younger bright spots towards the end of the season. But just Dan Quinn now, this is the second time where they released him last year when he was in Dallas, ended up signing with Washington, and now Dan Quinn has gone with Fidarian Mathis. Oh, Dan Quinn and Adam Peters, like I mentioned, because Adam Peters said in his press conference he has final say, of course, in final decisions. So I'll add him to that as well. But they have now given up on John Ridgeway for a second time. So that was just a little bit interesting thing to note. But yeah, Adam Peters, there was some rumors that Ridgeway was going to be traded after the third preseason game. It sounded like they were trying to shop Ridgeway. A lot of teams were calling. A lot of teams were interested. He ended up going to the New Orleans Saints for a 6-7 swap. I believe the 7th round conditional that Washington is sending over is based on playing time, I want to say. Not entirely sure, but I believe it's based on playing time. So John Ridgeway to the New Orleans Saints. He now teams up with his former teammate, actually, Chase Young, over there on that defensive line. With that being said, time to move on now to kind of just the 53-man roster in general. How did it shape out, and how and where are things at? I will say I got 47 of the 53 correct, which in a year that definitely it was very fluid throughout the entire preseason who was going to be on this roster. I would say that was pretty good, not incredible, but it was a pretty good prediction. 3 quarterbacks was something that I was not predicting, though. 3 quarterbacks on the roster: Jane Daniels, Marcus Mariota, and Jeff Driscoll. It makes sense, though. Now, Jeff Driscoll is I don't think he'll be on this active roster throughout the entire season, but just until Marcus Mariota is healthy, I feel like Driscoll is now the backup. Trace McSorley was released, and there was a 5th quarterback as well. I want to say Sam Hartman. Sam Hartman was put on the practice squad. So for now, three quarterbacks, 3 running backs: Brian Robinson, Austin Eckler, and Jerry McNichols. They chose over a guy like Michael Wiley, who a lot of Washington fans loved. Over the preseason, he had 2 touchdowns, and I believe was our leading rusher as well over the preseason. I mentioned ended up being 7 wide receivers. It was 6 on the initial 53-man roster, but it now ends up being 7 with the addition of Noah Brown. So Terry McLaurin, Alameda Zacchaeus, Byron Pringle, Luke McCaffrey, De'Ami Brown, Jamison Crowder, and Noah Brown are the 7. Tight ends: 4. Ben Sinnott, Zach Ertz, John Bates, and Colson Yankoff. Yankoff was on my final prediction as well. A guy that the Washington staff just seems to love the way he plays. We'll see how much time he gets. I don't know if he'll be active. I don't think he'll be active on most game days, but still, they have him on the final roster. 9 offensive linemen in this one as well: Michael Dieter, Tyler Biotish, Nick Allegretti, Andrew Wiley, Trent Scott, Brendan Coleman, Chris Paul, Sam Cosmi, and Cornelius Lucas are your 9. Brendan Coleman was not put on injured reserve. We'll see. His status is probably in the air for this upcoming game on Sunday, but we'll see if Dan Quinn and Cliff Kingsbury, if they have the guts to start him over a guy like Cornelius Lucas, even though we did not see Coleman at all during the preseason. We'll have to see how confident they are in the 2024 3rd-round pick. Of course, you've got Cosmi starting at right guard. You're probably going to have Andrew Wiley starting at right tackle, and at left guard, it will be Nick Allegretti. In terms of backups, Dieter made it. Chris Paul made it. Chris Paul's gotten time at both guard and tackle over this preseason, so they did really like him. Trent Scott made it, which I was kind of surprised about. I had him on my final roster, but he did not have a good preseason. He's kind of been injured throughout the entire preseason as well. Has not played great. Yeah, I was kind of surprised a guy like Trent Scott made it over Braden Daniels. Daniels, I believe, ended up on a different team's practice squad. I want to say it was the Vikings, but don't confirm me on that. I don't have confirmation on that. So Braden Daniels is gone now, the former 4th-round pick in 2023. Trent Scott, yeah. So it's just 9. It's just 9 only for the Washington offensive line, which the past years we've seen 10 and we've seen 11. So this was a little bit surprising. On the defensive line, though, Jamin Davis is listed as a defensive end. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, John Ridgeway, who got traded, Dorrance Armstrong, Jonathan Allen, Jerron Payne, Johnny Newton, Fidarian Mathis, and Cleveland Farrell. Again, John Ridgeway was traded. Ridgeway was on the initial 53, but since they traded him away, They signed Noah Brown. That was kind of the flip there. So I mentioned Davis. Wasn't sure if he was going to be listed as a linebacker or on the defensive line on the final roster. Ends up being listed on the defensive line. He's played on the line of scrimmage throughout the entire preseason so far, and it seems to be a better move than having him at outside linebacker. So what is that? That's 9 defensive linemen as well. Oh, sorry, 8 defensive linemen because Ridgeway is now traded. Javonte Jean-Baptiste, the 2024 7th-round pick. All of the draft picks for Dan Quinn and Adam Peters were on this final roster this year, which is cool to see. Fedarian Mathis, the 2022 2nd-round pick. I was surprised he's on the roster. They were getting calls for him as well. In terms of linebacker, Frankie Louvu, Dante Fowler, Michael Walker made it. Dom Hampton is listed as a linebacker, and Bobby Wagner. I mentioned how Hampton has played mostly in a linebacker role, the safety. They drafted him as a safety out of Washington. They drafted him in the 5th round back in April. But Dom Hampton listed as a linebacker on the final roster. So, again, kind of a little bit of a sneak peek of where they want to see Hampton play this season. Bobby Wagner, of course, will be starting with Frankie Louvu on the outside. Dante Fowler and Michael Walker is a guy that the staff seems to like as Walker makes the roster over a guy like Anthony Pittman, who is someone who was kind of in contention there for that final linebacker spot. Defensive backs, 11 of them. Mike Sanderstill, Jeremy Chin, Emmanuel Forbes, Noah Igbenogany, Quan Martin, Derek Forrest, Michael Davis, Benjamin St. Juste, Percy Butler, Jeremy Reeves, and the UDFA Tyler Owens. Now, this they kept everyone really. They kept as many people as possible in this DB room. I was kind of concerned on how many cornerbacks they would keep. I had 5. They ended up keeping 5. They kept to all 5 that I predicted. But sorry, I had them keeping 6. They kept 5. The 6th one that I had that they don't have here is Tariq Castro Fields. I believe he's on the practice squad now. But I had him as the 6th cornerback. And then they also have 6. They're keeping 6 safeties right now, which is crazy. It's crazy. Jeremy Chin, Quan Martin, Derek Forrest made it, which I was surprised about. They kept Percy Butler, Jeremy Reeves, and Tyler Owens. So they keep all 4 of Forrest, Butler, Reeves, and Owens. I did not see that one coming. I thought that Jeremy Reeves was potentially on the chopping block. I thought Tyler Owens was the only one that was going to be a lock between those 4. I had them keeping Butler, Reeves, and Owens over Derek Forrest. So I was surprised they end up keeping 6 safeties. And then, of course, the kicker, punter, long snapper, Cade York, Trustway, Tyler Ott. So overall, the 53 that was announced last week, not too many surprises. The only big surprises being, I would say, John Ridgeway being traded, and then the 7 wide receivers and the 6 safeties was something that kind of stood out to me as well. I feel like this team will be playing a lot of nickel, a lot of dime packages with the 11 defensive backs they will be keeping this year on this roster. So something to keep an eye on. I don't know how many linebackers they'll have on the field, especially with how thin this linebacker room is. I forgot to mention Jordan McGee is on injured reserve. He'll start the year on injured reserve. For the Washington Commanders, Efe Obada is still on the physically unable to perform list. Don't really know the status of him right now. So, yeah, that's the 53-man roster for the Washington Commanders. Again, not too many major surprises there. Now, I want to move on to the season. And the season ahead, that is only a week away now. I'm recording this the final Sunday without NFL football for the rest of the year, really. For the rest of 2024, I want to dive into the Washington Commanders 2024 regular season schedule. You've got 17 games. How will this team do? I'm going to split this into 4 different chunks because I feel like going game by game, like it's harder to go game by game than just like saying, oh, this team is going to go, I don't know, just like 2-2 in this 4-game chunk. I feel like that's a lot easier just because it's so unpredictable, the NFL, and who can come out on top on any given Sunday, they say. So I'm just going to start with the first 4 weeks of the year, weeks 1 through 4. Washington has at Tampa Bay at 4:25 this upcoming Sunday. Then they go home for their first home game of the year against the New York Giants at 1 p.m. on the following Sunday. Monday Night Football, week 3 at Cincinnati. That'll be a tough one on Monday Night Football. And then they travel to Arizona for week 4 to play the Arizona Cardinals. This stretch, I feel like the most important thing is just getting Jay Daniels comfortable. You've got Tampa Bay and New York, 2 defenses that they're not bad defenses, but they're not going to be top 10. They're not going to be like some of the defenses like Baltimore and Cleveland that he'll be facing in this kind of second month of games. But in the first month of games, I feel like these defenses, Jay Daniels can get used to and get comfortable. It's a little bit of an easier start in one of the harder schedules of the year. So in this stretch, at Tampa Bay, against New York, at Cincinnati, and at Arizona, I'm going to say this team goes 2-2. I don't know which games they win. I don't know which games they lose, but I think they go 2-2. Tampa Bay to me, is a 50-50 game. Washington should beat New York, so I have that as a win. Cincinnati will be a tough one, and Arizona, I feel like Washington could probably win one against Tampa Bay or Arizona. So I have them going 2-2 in this first stretch. But again, like, you can pick whichever games you want. I just feel like, it's any given Sunday, they say. So it's hard to predict the game by game what's going to happen, especially in a game that's like, as we get into later on, October, November, when player injuries could become a factor. So first 4 weeks of the season, I have this team going 2-2, which is the same record that they had through 4 weeks last year. So moving on to the second stretch of the year, the second month of the year in October, at home against Cleveland, on the road against Baltimore, and then home games against Carolina and Chicago. This is a tough stretch here, right? You've got Cleveland, Baltimore, Carolina, and Chicago. This team is 2-2 so far. You go into a home game against the Cleveland Browns. I know optimistic fans want to say it's a win, but it'd be a tough one. A rookie quarterback against a very good Jim Schwartz defense in Cleveland, and then you travel to Baltimore as well. That'll be a very tough game against the Ravens, a team that made the AFC Championship game last year. Carolina will probably be their easiest game of the year, and then Chicago is, I'm really high on the Chicago team this year. I feel like that'd be a tough one as well. I'm going to say they go 1-3. Now, they could upset a team like Baltimore or Cleveland, but maybe lose 2 to Carolina and Chicago. So I'm just going to go there. I'm just going to say they're 1-3. So at this point, they are, if I do my math correctly, they are 2-5 heading into week 9 of the year. Okay. I know some people are freaking out right now, but they're 2-5 going into week 9 at New York on a Sunday at 1 p.m. Then week 10 will be at home against Pittsburgh. Week 11, Thursday Night Football in Lincoln Financial against the Philadelphia Eagles. And then week 12 will be at home against the Dallas Cowboys. This stretch here, I'm going to go 1-3 again. I feel like they could upset a team like Philly or Dallas. Definitely in the realm of possibility. I feel like at New York, for some reason, the Giants always give this team trouble. Pittsburgh, don't really know what's happening. You know what? I'll go 2-2, actually. I'll go 2-2 for this stretch. I changed my mind. I'll go 2-2 because this team will beat one of Philadelphia or Dallas in that stretch. Week 11, week 12, they go at Philadelphia. Then they get the mini bye against Dallas at home. They'll win one of those games, and then they'll win against Pittsburgh or Tennessee. So now this team is 4-7 heading into their bye week. Oh wait, hold on. Okay, hold on. I was a week ahead. All right, so week 9 is at New York. Week 10 is at home against Pittsburgh. Week 11 is at Philadelphia. Week 12 versus Dallas, and week 13 versus Tennessee. So this is a 5-game stretch. I'll say they win 2 of them. So they go 2-3 in this 5-game stretch right before the bye week. That means they are 5 and what is this? 13 games, 5-8 heading into their week 14 bye. Like I mentioned it in previous podcasts. This third year in a row that the Washington Commanders have gotten a week 14 bye it's unfair. It's not fair. 3 years in a row that this team has gone the longest stretch of the season to begin the year without a bye, 3 years in a row. So I just don't understand that. But then we get into the final part of the season, the last 4 games, weeks 15 through 18. This team coming off the bye is 5-8. Playoffs are slightly out of the picture. You're now kind of looking at potentially the draft, what could happen there. Don't really know. I'm going to say this team goes 0-4. This team goes 0-4 in weeks 15 through 18. I think this team. Okay. Yeah, you're gonna say you're a Washington fan. Why are you predicting this team to go 0-4 in the last month of the season? I just don't have you gotta look at this from like a bird's eye view. This Washington team is not good. It's not, you've got hope. You've got hope for the future. Jane Daniels, franchise quarterback potentially. That's good for the future. You've got some good pieces on defense that are young, like Quan Martin. You've got Jeremy Chin as well. But if you just look at this team from a bird's eye view, compare them to a team like Philadelphia, to Atlanta, to Dallas, what are we doing? It's not good. It's not good. So the final stretch of the year at New Orleans, home against Philly, home against Atlanta, and then at Dallas to end the year. I think this team goes 0-4 and finishes the year 5-12. 5-12 in the first year of the Peters Quinn era. Not maybe what Washington fans are looking for. I'm hoping I am wrong. I'm hoping this team makes the playoffs. I'm hoping they make a deep run in the playoffs. But you've just got to look at this from bird's eye view. This offensive line is one of the worst in football. This secondary is probably the worst in football. This wide receiver room, especially after the Jahan Dotson trade, I know we just got Noah Brown back, but it's bottom 10. You just look at the units and you compare them to the rest of the league, and you kind of like reality sets in that this team is definitely going to be like looking forward to the draft, I would say, in 2025. Adam Peters is definitely looking forward to the draft, and you can already see it with Peters. He's trading away guys like Jahan Dotson, like John Ridgeway, to gather more draft picks for 2025 and that draft. I believe Washington is up to 9 or 10 picks already in the 2025 NFL draft. So more moves could potentially be coming at the trade deadline. You don't know, but right now, I think this team is a year away from being a year away. So 5-12 for the Washington Commanders to end the 2024 season. I am hoping I am wrong, but we look forward to 2025 and beyond. The next episode, hold on. That'll be it, though, for today's episode of Keeping with the Commanders. The next episode will be on Friday with a preview for the season opener against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. I'm looking forward to that one. Thank you guys for watching or listening to this episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. See you guys next one. Peace.